Welcome to this video on the critics of the New Deal. In this video, we'll be discussing the Supreme Court, a critic from the left, a critic from the right, and a critic from the nativists. We'll begin with the Supreme Court, and this is the court packing episode. Probably the most formidable and dangerous challenges to the New Deal came from the Supreme Court. Between 1935 and 1936, a series of Supreme Court decisions threatened the first New Deal, and many thought the overall recovery. This included President Franklin Delano Roosevelt. By the end of 1936, the Supreme Court had ruled against New Deal laws in 7 of 9 cases it had heard. These included the National Industrial Recovery Act and the Agricultural Adjustment Act. The Supreme Court ruled that the NRA, the National Recovery Administration, gave too much power to the executive branch, and that the AAA constituted an illegal restraint of trade because it paid farmers not to plow crops. These 2 pieces of legislation were at the heart of the New Deal, as it addressed the economy in its 2 main sectors, industry and agriculture. In 1936, the Supreme Court, why they could rule this way, the Supreme Court was made mostly of fairly conservative justices who had been appointed by Republicans Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. The bench included former presidential candidate and Secretary of State Charles Evans Hughes, who had followed William Howard Taft as Chief Justice. Thus, FDR was afraid that there would be further rulings against the Second New Deal. Thus, to offset the conservatives, FDR decided to increase the size of the Supreme Court. He was arrogant about it, however, and proposed his plan without consulting congressional leaders. Roosevelt proposed to add, in his plan, 6 new justices to the court, bringing it to a total of 15. On the pretense that the current justices were old and feeble and needed help to handle the court's workload, for good measure, he proposed to add up to 50 new federal judges for the lower courts. Now, technically, there's nothing illegal about FDR's plan, as the Constitution does not specifically say how many justices there were supposed to be and leaves it up to Congress to decide. The proposal backfired, however. Not only did FDR insult 9 Supreme Court justices by questioning their mental capacity, he also did not have the votes in Congress. But within a few months, the court began to rule favorably on New Deal cases, and one conservative justice, William Devanter, retired. So FDR got to appoint a more liberal replacement. This was Hugo Black. And there was no change to the court system, except that under FDR, the 12 years and a month that he served, the court eventually leaned toward the left. And by 1954, the court leaned far enough to the left to support the civil rights movement in Brown versus Board of Education. Now that the Supreme Court's your first critic, now a critic from the left, Huey P. Long. Huey Long attacked the New Deal from the left. Huey's story is a rags to riches story from rural north central Louisiana. Long had worked his way through law school. In fact, he only attended law school 1 year and then passed the bar. Huey became a successful lawyer, taking on corporations such as railroads, banks, and Standard Oil. He was elected governor of Louisiana in 1928 and senator from Louisiana in 1930. Because Huey did not trust his lieutenant governor, he remained governor of the state for the first 2 years of his Senate term. This is because the state had a law that allowed the lieutenant governor to take over if the governor went out of the state for 24 hours. Huey was also a big fan of the Louisiana State University, LSU, specifically the band and the football team. Huey led the parades before football games and even penned a song for the band, Touchdown for LSU, that is still played by the Tiger Band today. For the football team, he expanded their stadium. I call it the house that Long built. How could Huey Long build a stadium during the Great Depression in a historically poor state? Simple. He appropriated state funds given to him by the New Deal to build a dormitory. Underneath the north and south end zones of Tiger Stadium was a dormitory that housed male students until the early 1990s. Huey Long originally supported FDR at the 1932 Democratic National Convention and even directed delegates into FDR's camp. But soon after the election, Long broke with FDR because Huey thought the New Deal was too conservative to make a difference. Huey held a 3-week filibuster against the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933, telling senators how to make excellent corn pone, or cornbread. At one point, Huey had this to say about FDR's administration. Whenever this administration has gone to the left, I have voted with it. And whenever it's gone to the right, I have voted against it. Long's program was called the Share Our Wealth Program, and it proposed the massive redistribution of the nation's wealth via a Robin Hood scheme of taking from the rich and giving to the poor. It guaranteed a $5,000 estate for every American family. Long declared every man a king, which became Long's slogan and the title of his autobiography. This program was widely popular with poor people. By 1935, Roosevelt considered Long to be the man most likely to unseat him in 1936. In fact, FDR called Huey Long the second most dangerous man in America. And in case you're wondering, FDR believed Douglas MacArthur to be the most dangerous man in America at the time. But FDR did not have to worry, for Huey Long was assassinated in the Louisiana Capitol building that was built under his guidance on September 10, 1935. Now for your critic from the right. This is Father Charles Coughlin. Coughlin was a radio priest from Chicago. Coughlin had a weekly radio audience of 30 to 40 million listeners. This is approximately a quarter of the national radio audience for the Roman Catholic radio evangelists. Coughlin was very appealing and entertaining to the middle class, who had feared the loss of their way of life. And like Long, Coughlin admired FDR at first, but by 1939, Coughlin was increasingly radical and supportive of fascist dictators. His radio programs would praise the actions of Adolf Hitler in Germany and Benito Mussolini in Italy. Another critic from the right of FDR's New Deal was the Liberty League. It described itself as a, quote, nonpartisan organization founded to defend the Constitution and defend the rights of liberties guaranteed by the Constitution. The goals of the Liberty League were to arouse public opposition to what its members considered the dictatorial practices of the New Deal, and what they considered attacks on free enterprise. And although former Democratic presidential candidates John Davis and Al Smith served on the executive committee, the Liberty League was composed of wealthy businessmen. Led by the DuPont family, the owners of the nation's largest chemical company, other members included J. Howard Pugh, who headed Sun Oil, Alfred P. Sloan Jr., the chairman of General Motors, Ernest T. Ware, a steel magnate, and James Montgomery Beck. Some of these names may sound familiar to you, as their families are major PBS sponsors today. Beck referred to the New Dealers as, quote, Washington Stalins, unquote. And within a year of its founding in 1934, there were more than 35,000 members of the Liberty League. It attracted over 10,000 college students from 345 institutions. I'd like to thank you for watching this video on the critics of the New Deal, and as always, may the force be with you.